Welcome to Our Scars Speak. My name is Christina Miner. I am the host of this podcast. And before we begin, I'd like to give a disclaimer that we are not telling you to leave any information that your doctors and any of your care professionals have told you. Do not leave it. Make sure you maintain it. Make sure that you adhere to that. We encourage that. Everything that we're sharing is just for support and also for some education and some knowledge. But we are not sharing this to tell you to leave anything that other individuals have told you that are caring for you directly. You're listening at your own discretion. We're not being held liable. So I want to get that out of the way. And tonight's guest, who I am so thrilled about, I do not know her personally, but I've seen her videos and she is great. And she's a wealth of knowledge about nutrition. And she's a dietitian. Her name is Samantha Haswell. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name right.
Yeah, you're right.
And she is from VCU Massey Cancer Center. I am thrilled. She's going to knock out some myths for us that we have. She's going to tell us some new information. But thank you so much, Samantha, for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Well, Samantha, as you know, I like to know, who is Samantha? Without the titles of dietitian and all these great things that you're doing, how would you describe yourself to the audience?
Oh, thanks for asking. So I am a dietitian and I have been interested in nutrition throughout my entire life. So my family grew up as relatively healthy eaters with interests in health and wellness. And I did initially, in my mind, I thought I was going to be a doctor. That was what I was going to do. But then I shadowed some people and shadowed some dietitians, some pharmacists, some PAs, some doctors throughout my undergrad, and realized I really want to go the more holistic direction in healthcare. So I became a dietitian.
Okay.
So that started with my undergrad in health sciences, and then I got a master's in human nutrition from Drexel.
Okay.
Completed my dietetic internship at VCU Health, left for a little bit, went some other places, but I've always done oncology nutrition, and it's always kind of been where my heart lies.
Okay, so since you have obviously loved this field since you were early on, so that's basically like what your life has consisted of, just this passion and drive to live not only about, it seems like also just like you stated, holistic. So with holistic, that can mean so much more than just food. It can mean exercise. It can mean, meditation and different things of that nature. So I think that was very important that you stated that, because a lot of times people hear dietitian and hear certain words and they only think of medical or health, like related to the hospital.
Like food police kind of is usually what we hear.
That's true. So now that, because you've definitely told us a little bit about how you kind of got into it, was there anything significant? Because, I do talk to like breast cancer patients and thrivers and caregivers even. So is there anything that kind of geared you towards oncology? Was there anything like a family member that had cancer, or it was just your passion? Because that's pretty specific that you narrowed it down to.
Narrowed it down to that, yeah. So my grandmother did have pancreatic cancer when I was in elementary school. And unfortunately, she did pass away. But I saw what a tough time she went through. So for her, she had lost a lot of weight. It was really difficult going through treatment. And she actually did not have a dietitian at the community cancer center she had been at. So we really, unfortunately, kind of saw her waste away with her cancer. It was pretty advanced. But it did kind of lead me in that direction, thinking of like how she could have used that support in general. And then overall, it's just general interest. There are a lot of different foods that affect cancer. And there's a lot of things that can be done during active treatment to help patients prevent malnutrition. So it's just kind of an overall desire to help people who are going through a really tough time.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, that personal piece, because whenever someone say a specialty, I'm like, it's got to be something that kind of drove you that direction. And yes, I'm sorry to hear that about your grandmother, but I do love the fact that you were able to recognize, what if these things would have been in place? Not to say, and as you know, and I know, it's not to say that it wouldn't have happened, she wouldn't have passed, but it's to say, did we really try everything? Did we try everything from all standpoints? And I think for a lot of cancer patients, that's our thought process. Okay, we're going to do the medicine, the surgery, but what about some other things? What other things could you help us with? So that is beautiful. Now, I'm not going to ask, usually I ask a whole bunch of other questions and stuff, but this is pretty much your platform. I will come back to asking about your song and everything like that at the
I
end.
love it.
But right now, I really would like for you, if you could start out with about the plate. I know there's a new plate. I have a dietitian, and she informed me, hey, you know, we got this new plate, and she went over everything with me. So I'm not a dietitian. I'm not going to dare try to overstep. I'll let you have the platform and do what you do.
Absolutely. I appreciate the introduction. So what Christina is referring to, for those of you online, is the American Institute of Cancer Research New American Plate. And basically, this is a way of eating that gears towards cancer prevention and survivorship long term, with the overall goal of hoping to prevent new cancer from developing if you've had cancer, or to prevent you from getting cancer if you have not, which hopefully many of you haven't. And I'm going to actually share my screen here so I can show you guys what that looks like. So this is the New American Plate, and the idea behind it is that you want to get as many plants on your plate as you can. So about 2/3 or more of your plate, you want to be plant-based, and then 1/3 or less animal protein. So when we talk about plant-based, we mean fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes. And then for your animal protein, we're talking about any kind of animal protein, from your dairy, your seafood, your red meat, your poultry, anything that is animal-based would fit into that category.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure this is probably going to be a question a lot of people have. So there's a lot of discrepancies out there when people hear the word plant-based. Some individuals say, oh, if you're plant-based, you're all plants. And then some individuals will be like, no, that's not what it means. It means that I still have some animal proteins, but not as many, or not as large quantity that I normally would have. So I just wanted, from your perspective as a dietitian, could you elaborate a little bit about the animal protein as far as the word plant, the wording of plant-based?
Absolutely. So if you would like to be vegan or vegetarian, if maybe there's a personal relationship to that you have and you prefer that diet, you can absolutely do it that way. But for cancer prevention, you do not have to be vegetarian or vegan to make steps towards cancer prevention. When it comes to animal proteins, there are certain animal proteins you do want to limit for cancer prevention. We can talk about those a little bit, and those are going to be processed meats. So unfortunately, processed meats develop N-nitroso compounds, which are associated with colorectal cancer development. Does that mean if you have had bacon ever, you're going to get colorectal cancer? No, that's not what that means. That's not quite how the body works. But generally, we do recommend that you avoid processed meat if you can. And that is going to be any meat that's been cured, fermented, salted, had preservatives added, had nitrates added, which basically means your hot dogs, your sausage, your bacon, even some of your lunch meats. Just to keep in mind that those things can increase your risk. The other side of that is also going to be red meat. So red meat, we generally recommend from the American Institute of Cancer Research to limit it to 12 to 18 ounces per week or less. And the reason for that is that they have found, using the Continuous Update Project, which is a project between the World Cancer International Fund, I'm blanking on the exact name, I will look it up for you guys later, and American Institute of Cancer Research, looking at basically all the data they could collect on nutrition and physical activity across the nation, across the world, to see what causes cancer. And they have found that people who have more than 12 to 18 ounces per week do have a higher risk of developing colorectal cancer.
Wow. Okay. And so is that pretty much, I know you said I can never pronounce it, but what about breast cancer? Is it the same rate or not as much?
It is particularly associated with colorectal.
Okay.
But I always tell my patients, even if you've had breast cancer, you've had pancreatic, you've had something different, we never want to trade one cancer for another.
Right.
And a lot of those same recommendations can be taken into account to make sure that we're not just making sure your breast cancer doesn't come back, but we're making sure that you don't get something new that you don't want anyway.
Okay. Makes sense.
Other side of this is thinking about what you're putting on your plate. So we talked about how fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and legumes are all part of a plant-based diet. but there are things you want to do beyond that. So generally speaking, I'm going to switch to my next slide to show you. When they've done research on whole grains in particular, they found that having 3 servings, which is about 90 grams of whole grains, can reduce your colorectal cancer risk by 17%. And there's a few different ways this can work. So they think that it could be because it's the source of dietary fiber, and a healthy gut loves dietary fiber. They think that it can help your intestinal microbiota, can help promote short-chain fatty acids, which can be cancer preventative, reduce your transit time, which basically, a graphic form helps you poop better, and prevent insulin resistance. So all those things are really important for helping to prevent cancer. So that's why they recommend whole grains. We do recommend having that 3 servings a day. And a serving is something as simple as a slice of whole grain bread. About 1/3 of a cup of brown rice is a serving. You could also be more experimental and do things like popcorn is actually considered a whole grain, and items like that to help get that stuff in. But it's really important to get that extra fiber and to get those whole grains in.
Wow. That's startling. I'm wondering how, I'm just sitting here thinking about, wow, because, and it is true, because for the longest they used to say, oh, you have IBS, and which is irritable bowel syndrome for those who don't know. But my dietitian was like, her name is Abby, and she was like, up your fiber first, because the doctor wanted to give me all this other stuff. And she said, try your fiber. And it's so startling, because it's like, oh, all I could have had was that and some water. But yes, fiber intake made the world of difference.
Fiber intake is huge, and it helps prevent cancer. It also helps prevent diabetes and heart disease. For those of you who don't know, soluble fiber in particular binds to your LDL cholesterol and helps it exit your body via excretion. So by eating that fiber, you're actually helping more than one disease state. You're not just preventing colorectal cancer, but you're helping prevent yourself from having high cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, which can prevent heart attacks and strokes in the future. You're slowing down how your glucose is raising. So when you have a lot of fiber, it takes your body a little longer to digest that, which means that you're not having that big spike in glucose.
Right.
So when you pair something like fibrous foods, like your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains and your beans, and then a protein of some kind, you slow that digestion and you let that glucose go nice and slow, so you're less risk of developing diabetes.
Wow. And I heard you state, because processed meat, I heard you talk about like the hot dogs and stuff like that. So the lunch meat, if you could, because you said, I may have misunderstood what you said, but it sounded like you stated like some of the lunch meats. Is there a difference, or it's just like we should also watch all of them? Because I know some of them behind the deli thing, they'll say like low sodium, low this, low that. So are those a little bit more healthier than the packaged ones that you find in the cold section? I mean,
lunch meat is a bit of a gray area, because a lot of the research on it, a lot of lunch meat used to have nitrates and nitrites added for preservative. Now there are a lot of nitrate and nitrite free deli meats, but there are some natural forms of nitrate and nitrite that you could add to meats, like things like celery. If you add celery to meat, it actually can form that. So it's a little bit of a gray area. I generally tell my patients to avoid all processed meat as much as they can, but maybe don't panic. Like if you're at like a family function and they're doing Jimmy John's and you really want a Jimmy John's sub, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I'm going to get colorectal cancer, I can't have that. Instead, don't do it all the time. Instead, if you're thinking of like easy ways to make meals, I sometimes will tell my patients, try buying things like rotisserie chicken and keeping it in your fridge. So that's an easy way to have easy access to that protein maybe that you want in that sandwich without it being a deli meat or a processed meat.
Okay. And while we're on meats, if you could answer, because a lot of times people will say, well, I'm vegetarian, or I'm doing mostly plant-based. And so I've also heard like a lot of packaged things just in general aren't necessarily that great for us. And with that being said, you know how they have the, I don't know if I guess it's not processed. Well, maybe it is. The like the turkey, it's like turkey. I don't know the name of it, but it's like tofu turkey
Oh,
meat.
tofurkeys.
Tofurkey, that's what it is. I was like, am I going to say this right? But
Yes.
are
So when you
those
talk
things the
about
same or not?
tofu or
Yeah.
tofurkey, it is actually, so I'm gonna actually stop my screen share so I can pull the
No,
difference
you're
for
fine.
you to show
Yeah.
you this. But so tofu and soy in general is actually a really, really healthy protein to have.
Okay.
Let me just switch ahead because I can show you some good data that I've actually looked into for patients for this.
Yeah, I was just wondering because when you say processed, because some people don't eat processed meat at all,
Mhm.
they don't eat meat. So I didn't know if the processed foods that are vegan geared or vegetarian geared, were those healthy for you, or there kind of discrepancies I didn't know.
So kind of there is a difference. So I would say 100% soy milk, tempeh, tofu, like the natural soybeans, like edamame, like straight up edamame, are very healthy.
Okay.
I generally don't recommend eating the kind of more processed items like the fake chicken nuggets, things like that on a regular basis. Part
Okay.
of that is there's a lot of additives and preservatives to those foods, but it's also more so there's a lot of sodium usually when you buy stuff like that that's been kind of turned into something else. They want to make it taste very similar to that animal protein that it's not. So you
Mhm.
are getting a pretty like preservative enriched and salty meal. And we don't want you to trade that and have high blood pressure because you're eating a lot of the very processed kind of fake meats.
Okay.
That being said, I know that it is very, very common with my lovely breast cancer patients to ask about soy and breast cancer because there's a lot of misinformation.
Yeah.
So that stems from the fact that soy has a compound in it called phytoestrogen that kind of looks like estrogen. But thankfully, over time, we've discovered it does not function that way. It doesn't function like estrogen. And as you can see in this lovely kind of wordy slide I've posted here, there actually has been a multitude of studies that have shown that higher intake of soy was actually associated with a 10% reduced risk of cancer incidence. And that was overall cancer incidence, not just breast cancer, but just overall.
Right.
And they found that each additional 25 grams per day of sodium further decreased the risk of cancer by 4%.
Mm.
Big
Wow.
reason for that is probably there's a lot of fiber in soy because it is a bean.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of protein. It is full of phytochemicals because it has that lovely phytoestrogen that is actually not going to affect your breast cancer.
Okay.
It's going to help prevent cancer. And in general, like that fiber, that healthy protein is going to be great for you. It's really going to be helpful if you do like things like tofu or even soy milk. It's definitely safe to have it, and it's a good way to get some extra protein.
Good. Yeah, I was scared to death to eat it because I was listening to various people and they were like, no, 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 you can't have soy, because I loved the soy unsweet vanilla, was by Silk or somebody. And I was like, I have to give that up because I don't like milk. I've never liked milk. And I fell in love with soy milk. And they were like, no, you can't, you shouldn't drink that. It
So
has
you
too
can
much soy,
definitely
it
have
has
that.
estrogen. And what is your cancer driven off of? I said, it's ER/PR positive. Oh, no, 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 you can't because of the estrogen. But then I spoke to my doctor and my dietitian, and they were
Mhm.
like, that's a myth. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And they explained what you did as far as the differences. But
Mhm.
so basically those things are good to eat, the processed part being aware of the sodium, but knowing
Mhm.
that we can have the soy. So also, I guess the other question is sugar. You hear a lot about sugar, a lot about you shouldn't eat sugar. And to me, I could be wrong, but to me, any
Mhm.
large amount of sugar is not good for you. But I wouldn't say that sugar or carbohydrates as a
Yeah.
whole, because it's like, oh, they're gonna, it's gonna turn into sugar, and then this and that'll happen to you. Could you give us the educated
Yes.
information
So
about surrounding sugar and the CT, not the CT scan, the PET scan? Because a lot of people say, well, the PET scan, they use sugar and the cancer runs to it. Could
yes,
you
that is a
please?
very common misconception.
Yeah. Can you?
So the
Yeah.
big thing with cancer to start with is when you get that PET scan, the reason that the cancer cells light up like that isn't because they're like, oh, it's the sugar, they're feeding directly off of it. That's what's happening. It's really that cancer cells themselves use a lot more energy than regular, normal, healthy cells. So when you get a PET scan, what they're looking for in that PET scan is the cells that are basically using way more energy, putting off more energy. So they're basically stealing more of the energy you're taking in, regardless of what that energy is. So your body obviously feeds off carbohydrates and glucose, but it also uses protein, it uses fat. And those cancer cells are going to take whatever they can. They don't really care whether it's straight up glucose or it's whole grains or it's a fruit or a vegetable. They're looking for energy. And when you sometimes cut out so much of those foods because you're fearful of it, that you say lose too much weight during treatment or don't support your body the way you need to, sometimes you can actually kind of hurt yourself by allowing, your immune system to be impacted and your muscle mass to be impacted. So it is very important during treatment to not cut out a ton of foods at once so that you can prevent that malnutrition. From the other side of it, a very unhealthy diet, so a diet that is very high in refined carbohydrates and a lot of cake and cookies and fried foods and McDonald's and things like that on a really regular basis, does promote excess energy intake. And when you have that excess energy or calorie intake, unfortunately, it does promote having higher body fat, and that higher body fat can increase your risk a little bit. It does cause a bit of inflammation. And it does actually, if you're eating really poorly and you have really high insulin levels on a regular basis, that hyperinsulinemia, we call it, can increase your risk of developing cancer. So it's not so much that it's sugar itself, but it's an unhealthy diet overall can generally increase your risk of developing cancer.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that was clear. I know there's like a lot of information at once.
No, that's not a lot of information because a lot of people were, I guess, what is being injected per se, as far as the PET scan, that's making.
Ooh, that is a tough question for me. I actually don't know the exact
I think it has
build of the molecules, like what they're giving you.
Yeah, I'll ask the radiologist, but
yes, I bet she definitely would know.
Yeah, yeah, I'll ask her. But that's where their fear is coming from.
Yes.
Some of that, not all of it, but yeah, I was always told just a healthy diet overall. It's not per se just sugar, but
like occasionally having cake at a birthday, or
right.
having a cookie after dinner is not going to make or break someone's cancer prevention, their cancer treatment, or their cancer survivorship. It's really about the overall picture of how you're eating.
Okay. And I guess the other one would be definitely alcohol. I've heard I've heard that was one that they were like, do not do at all. I didn't know if you had any information on that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm going to break some hearts if people do like having a drink or a glass of wine. Generally, American Institute of Cancer Research does recommend avoiding alcohol. Just because technically the way alcohol is processed in your body, it does form a carcinogen in the body. And it is technically, when you think about it, it is a little poisonous. Think about your reaction to alcohol when you drink too much and how it damages your liver. So they do recommend avoiding it. Or if someone really can't avoid it, really limiting it to 1 drink per day for women, max of 2 drinks per day for men, and not overdoing it. Because there are quite a few cancers, particularly head and neck, thinking off the top of my head, that are associated with alcohol intake and high alcohol intake in particular.
And so when you say to a woman, and if you don't mind, woman or man, when you say 1 drink, because see, 1 drink for some people could be 16 ounces.
Yes.
What exactly, can you break that down? And I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence, but I really want people to be educated, because some people will say, hey, look, I'm just having 1 drink, and it's a whole 2 cans of beer. It's a 16-ounce can, or it's like it's a double shot. So can you break that down to what that looks like for a man and for a woman per day? And
absolutely. So 1 drink is really 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of distilled liquor. Unfortunately, if you are having more than that, even if it fits in 1 glass, it is still more than 1 drink. So that's something to be mindful of if you are drinking alcohol. Try to abstain, but if it's something like you're doing it socially and you really want to have a glass of wine with your family, try to make sure it's just that 5 ounces.
And that can be done once a day.
Once a day for women, no more than twice a day for men.
And what's the difference between the woman and the man on that standpoint? Is it like metabolism or something? I mean, like why could a man have two versus
Yeah.
what is that about?
You know what? That is a great question. And I don't think I've ever actually personally looked into it. My guess would be it's probably body size,
Yeah,
but
I was thinking so.
don't quote me on that. I'd recommend everyone Googling that themselves because that is like actually the first time anyone's actually asked me, what is the difference?
Sorry, I wasn't trying to throw you off.
No,
But
I
I was
appreciate it. I will shamelessly say I actually have never looked at that.
no, don't worry about it. Because I always, because they have everything like, well, the man this and then the woman this. And so I was like, it's got to be their size or something. Like it's got to
Yes,
be
it's
the body
my
weight,
guess is it's
metabolism, or
likely
something.
size, but
Okay.
don't quote me on that. I do recommend looking at some peer-reviewed articles. Actually, while we're sitting here, we're going to look at it right now. Let's see,
But,
guys.
but yeah, I think so. It's got to be, I would think it has to be, because metabolism, everybody has different metabolisms, I guess. So,
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, Harvard Health has the exact answer for
oh,
this, which I always find interesting when someone else has looked into it.
oh,
So says women are more susceptible than men to the effects of alcohol. So that is why it is one for women and two for men. And they are saying that the reason for that is the bodies contain less water and more fat than men's bodies. And water
oh,
dilutes alcohol and fat retains it. So for women, because we have more adipose tissue, more body fat, because we need to have that for childbearing and for just in general, our hormones are
yeah.
different. So our organs are apparently exposed to higher concentrations of alcohol for longer periods of time because our body fat differences.
Wow, look at that. I love
So
it.
we all learned something new, guys, including the
Live,
dietitian.
live research, right? Peer-reviewed live research from Harvard.
There we go.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for that. Is there any other things that you would definitely like to tell people about what you do and the things that you share with your cancer patients? Feel free, share
Yeah.
whatever you like.
So for those of you who are active cancer patients, it's really important to keep in mind that a New American Plate diet is really important if you are doing well during treatment. So I do have a caveat to that. So if you are having a lot of taste changes, you aren't liking how a lot of foods feel in your mouth, you're having pain, you're having stomach upset, it's really important that someone focuses on maintaining their body weight more than following a strict New American Plate diet. So malnutrition can increase how severe your treatment side effects are, and it can affect how well your treatment works. So it's really important that you work on maintaining your weight during treatment. If you are unable to follow this diet because you have all these different symptoms, it's okay to do things like white bread and milkshakes to get your calories in.
Mm.
So just keep that in mind if you're in active treatment. It will not make or break how your treatment goes if you don't follow the New American Plate diet from American Institute of Cancer Research. We encourage you to try that for as long as you can. But if you're having a lot of symptoms, it's way more important to prevent malnutrition and prevent that rapid weight loss.
Mm. Okay. That's good information to know. So that's during treatment. Is there anything that you like to share about like coming out of treatment? Anything?
Absolutely.
Yeah, feel free.
Big thing is really, we talked about plant-based diet. I tell people, if you're thinking of nothing else when you put a meal together, think about what's my protein? Do I have a whole grain? And what's my fruit or vegetable?
Okay.
Ideally, when you put your plate together, if you're trying to do a cancer preventative diet and you're trying to maybe have weight management or really control your glucose, I'd say about a fourth of your plate should be your protein, whether that's plant-based or that's the animal proteins we talked about. About a quarter of your plate should be that whole grain. And ideally, about half your plate should be non-starchy vegetables, maybe with a little bit of fruit there too.
Mm.
Breakfast time's a little iffy. I know a lot of people aren't like, oh, I love half a plate of non-starchy vegetables at breakfast. So if you don't have it at that meal, having some fruit, maybe with your oatmeal and your egg is totally fine. But
Okay.
always keep in mind that getting those different food groups in is going to be really important for cancer prevention and for general wellness. There's a lot of really good vitamins and minerals that are different in all these differing foods. So you get a pretty good balance if you're making sure you include fruits and vegetables and whole grains and protein.
Good to know. And far as grains, there is one question I want to ask as far as that. So, you have your instant oatmeal that's in the little
Mhm.
packet. I don't usually it has a lot of sugar. So, you have the other oatmeal that's in the
Yeah.
little it's Quaker oats, for example, 5 minutes or 1 minute to cook.
Yeah.
Is that okay for you, or that's something you should be aware of? Can you even have a serving size of that, like a half
Yeah,
or two?
absolutely. Those are totally fine.
Okay.
So the big thing is ideally, I prefer people to get oatmeal itself. So it can be the quick oats though. So there are a lot of different types of oats. There's steel cut, there's quick cooking, there's old fashioned. All of those are going to be a whole grain. So
Okay.
whichever one is your preference is absolutely fine. You can have that for sure. Usually I recommend that if you're doing the individual packets, that you try to get the one that's just oatmeal and then add your own stuff to it.
Okay.
Big thing for that is then you have a little bit more control of how much is in there. So
Mm.
if you're someone who maybe wants their oatmeal to be a little bit sweet, you might want to add a whole bunch of fresh or frozen fruit to it to get that sweetness. But the packets tend to have a lot of their own sugar, so you don't have that control of how much sugar is going in. So even if you do want a little honey, if you're making it yourself, you can control the amount, where you can't do that if you buy like the pre-made packet.
Okay. Well, you have just sparked up two more questions. So you said sweet, and
Mhm.
ding, ding, ding. We have heard so much about Splenda, Sweet and Low, mostly Splenda, Trivia. I think that's how you pronounce it. But all these sweeteners,
Mhm.
that are artificial or whatever. So could you elaborate on that? Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Is it going to hurt you to have like one little tiny pack in your coffee every day?
Yeah.
What is that about? Because we've heard about heart attacks, cardiovascular stuff. We've also
Mhm.
heard about cancer. It's being cancer related, the non-sweeteners,
Yeah.
that sweetener, whatever, you know what I'm talking
Yeah, they
about.
call the non-nutritive sweeteners, I think is what they
There
call
you go.
them.
You are the educator.
Mhm.
Obviously. So can you tell us about like what that's all about? Can it cause
So
cancer?
there has been a lot of back and forth on the non-nutritive sweeteners. That being said, the amount you would have to have each day to give you cancer from those is a really crazy amount. I can't remember the exact number of packets off the top of my head, but it's upwards of 50 for most of them. It's not like a
Oh,
little bit.
okay.
So if you are someone who is, say you have diabetes, you really need to watch your sugar, but you really are having a hard time not having something sweet,
Hmm.
using those a little bit can be okay. From a dietitian standpoint, I generally would like people to move away from eating a lot of processed food. So I do recommend people cut back on those as much as they can.
Okay.
And I do find that for most people, their taste buds will adjust to less sweet over time.
Mm.
So sometimes I'll tell my patients, like if they really love sweet tea, but they're trying to cut down on their sugar sweetened beverages, I'll tell them to put less and less sugar either every few days, every week to get more used to the natural flavor of the food, or
Okay.
take advantage of your natural sugars, like adding fruit to things to get flavor and sugar flavor instead of having, straight up table sugar.
Okay. So for example, if someone like coffee,
Mhm.
and they like it sweet, instead of using like Splenda or sugar, what would be something, and this is just off the wall question, what
Yeah.
would be something that you would probably suggest them put in their coffee?
So I will say that a lot of people think that there's a difference between like sugar versus honey versus maple syrup. From a body perspective, there's not. Are there different nutrients? Yes, like bees make honey that they have different nutrients than straight up table sugar. Same thing with maple syrup. There's a little bit different stuff in there, but they do all function the same.
Mm.
That being said, a little tiny bit won't hurt you, but I still would try to move away from it if you can over time. So cutting down to a little less each time, just so like you're not doing it on a regular basis. Just so sugar sweetened beverages, unfortunately, especially when they're not with a meal,
Hmm.
will cause a glucose spike, which, a little bit of a glucose spike very occasionally might not be a big deal, but doing it every single day or having a lot of sugar sweetened drinks can cause your body to start being taxed a little bit. It causes your pancreas to work a little too hard to release that insulin to bring that glucose back down. And we want to make sure we're preventing people from developing something like type 2 diabetes from drinking a
Right.
lot of sugar sweetened beverages.
That makes sense. Okay, I was like, I wonder what she has to say about that. Because those are things that I've heard people talk about. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely want to mention that. So the last thing that I have that I can think of far as a question, if you have anything else, feel free to share. But the last thing that I can think of far as not necessarily a myth, but information out there is about grilling food. Far as grilling meats and fruits and what the carcinogenic of that, what do you have for us about that? Because some people don't
Absolutely.
eat grilled meat at all, don't eat grilled fruit, don't eat grilled vegetables.
So I'm going to share my screen again so you can
Oh,
see.
you got more stuff.
I do. I have all the things.
Yeah, feel free.
So there is a risk of cancer with cooking, particularly meats at really high temperature. So animal proteins, not so much fruits and vegetables. But generally what happens when you cook meat at a very high temperature,
Mhm.
which if I remember correctly, I want to say it's above 300 degrees, but I will confirm that for you guys before we sign off. You develop two compounds. So there's heterocyclic aromatic amines, your HCAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, your PAH. Your HCA forms when the amino acids that are inside your proteins, your animal proteins, are all made up of amino acids. The sugar and the creatine that is in animal products naturally reacts at a high temperature. So studies have found that if you do things like marinating your meat, you can reduce that. If you flip your meat frequently, you can reduce that risk when you grill. Or if you keep things on indirect heat or using foil or keeping it away from the flame. So basically you want to prevent that high temperature from being constant on that meat so that you can hopefully prevent some of those HCAs from forming. The
Okay.
PAHs are from smoke. So those of you who love that deep char,
Yeah, that would be me.
I unfortunately would recommend trying not to do the deep char on a regular basis just because you are developing those compounds. But similarly to how you would treat something to prevent HCA from forming, you can reduce how much is exposed to the flame by pre-cooking it. So you can actually microwave your meat a little bit so it's a little pre-cooked before you put it on the grill. Or doing things like cutting it into smaller pieces so it's not spending as much time on that flame. Or choosing leaner meats too. So fattier meats will drip fat into your grill and then that causes that kind of smoke to blow up a little bit, that flame to rise. So by choosing leaner cuts, you have less of that flame rise while you're cooking. But all the plant-based items are safe on the grill because they don't have those same compounds. They don't have the creatine and things like that the animal proteins do. So doing things like tofu on the grill is fine. Fruits, vegetables, all of that is totally fine on the grill and not a risk.
Okay. Well, that shares a lot because a lot of people think can't grill anything. And I was like, I don't know. So I'm gonna see if Samantha can shed some light on on that one because I was told different that we meats would, but not necessarily the vegetables and
Yeah, I
fruits.
highly encourage some grilled pineapples, delicious. If you haven't had it with some cinnamon on there, it's great.
Oh, thanks for the tip. I'll try. I'll try it this summer. Was there anything else like on your PowerPoint or anything that you would like to share with the audience before we sign off? Feel free, go for it.
So nothing too crazy. I think my biggest thing, if you are, say, a fruit and vegetable hater, but you know you really want to prevent cancer, is try something new and start small. I think a lot of people go in as all or nothing. If you are someone who maybe isn't eating fruits and vegetables right now, start with setting SMART goals. So those are going to be like specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time related goals. So maybe that might be something like, okay, I'm going to start by eating one vegetable at dinner this week. And then once you hit that goal, you can move on again and being like, all right, I'm going to increase it to a vegetable at lunch and dinner this week, and keep setting those SMART measurable goals because it doesn't have to be all or nothing all at once.
Yeah. And I think it can become very overwhelming. Like, oh, I went from eating this huge amount of food or huge amounts of sugar, and now I got to drop it to nothing overnight. And I think that's also how people end up having a recycling of, just relapsing, basically.
Yeah, let your body adjust.
Yeah. Yep. So I know you talked about, yeah, I can't end this before you, if please answer this question for you. So you talked about beef.
Mhm.
As far as chicken, turkey, and seafood, those three things, what's your thought? Well, not thoughts, but what do you have far as like, is it okay to eat those things or still you should minimize? I know you said it's like 1/3 of the plate now,
Yeah.
but is there anything they need to know specifically about like the chicken and the turkey and seafoods?
So I'm going to share my slide again.
Oh, see, you got more slides.
I have slides for everything, guys. Generally, these are going to be your healthier protein sources. That being said, also I put beans. I meant beans and legumes. For
Okay.
those of you who know the difference, they're both. But
Oh, you can share what the difference is, please, because a lot of people don't know.
So all the beans and legumes, basically like that category, not all legumes are beans, but all beans are legumes is basically the thing for that. So legumes basically includes your peas, your soy, your beans, your lentils, all of that into one category. I just have it listed as beans here, but all those lovely plant-based foods like chickpeas, all of that is fantastic. When it comes to eating your animal-based proteins, like your poultry and your fish, both of those are healthy. Just be mindful of your poultry not eating the skin. So as much as I know people find the skin to be really tasty, it is really high in saturated fat. So from a heart health perspective, you want to peel that skin off so that you don't have that increased risk of heart attack and stroke from really high saturated fat diet, causing you to have high cholesterol.
Okay.
When it comes to fish, shellfish and fish are both perfectly healthy from a cancer perspective. You can definitely choose to eat them. And same thing with eggs are a good source. I don't have those listed on this page exactly, but eggs can be a good source of protein as well. It's really just those red meats, which is like your lamb, your goat, your pork, and your actual beef that are the ones that are increase your risk, along with your processed meats, like your hot dogs, your sausage, your bacon, and your lunch meats.
Okay. As far as the fish, for instance, salmon, tilapia, a lot of those are farm raised. Can you shed some light about that, as far as it being farm raised versus catching it, I guess, out in the ocean somewhere? Like, what's the difference?
Yes.
A lot of people will buy the farm raised because it's cheaper, but it's not always healthier. And I know there's a fat situation going on in that, but I would like
So
to.
there is a lot of misinformation that like if you have farm raised, it doesn't give you benefits. Yes, there are some different nutrient profiles that are slightly different between farm raised versus wild caught fish, but there's still going to be those same benefits. So if you have salmon, you're still going to get, really healthy unsaturated fat in your salmon. So I usually will tell people, I'd rather you do what is cost effective for your family versus stressing yourself out trying to buy wild caught if you can't afford to do so.
Makes sense.
If you can, that's great. If you can't, it's totally fine and healthy to have farm raised. There's the differences in the nutrient profile aren't big enough to indicate you needing to go out of your way.
Okay. Because I've often heard like, oh, if it's farm raised, it has more fat in it because of how they feed them and because they're in a smaller area versus if they're in their normal
In their wild area.
Yeah.
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 And even if that was the case, keep in mind that for most fish, the fat that is in fish is your omega-3 fatty acids. It's the healthy fat. It's the fat you want. It's the fat that's going to help lower cholesterol and keep you healthy. So that is okay to have a little bit more of those healthy fats in there.
All right. And so your shrimps, but I'm talking about seafood too, like shrimp, and how is that okay? I know it's usually high in cholesterol, but
Yeah,
shrimp and all of that, is that okay for people to consume?
absolutely. Shrimp is totally safe from a cancer perspective. I would say from a cholesterol perspective, there has been a lot of research back and forth about how much dietary cholesterol really matters. I usually tell people if you're having some eggs in the morning and a serving of shrimp occasionally, I wouldn't really worry about it too much.
Okay.
If you eat nothing but eggs and shrimp, maybe I would cut back on it just because the research has kind of gone back and forth. But generally, I think that those foods are fine to have.
And I'm thankful that you brought up about the cholesterol, because even though, say, a cancer patient may not have a cholesterol problem, that I know chemo and radiation can sometimes narrow the vessels, which then if you do end up having a little bit of plaque buildup, it could compromise. So
Definitely.
That's definitely something we need to be concerned about as well. Well, all of it we do.
Mhm.
Somebody had a question. Oh, you may have already. Oh, is pink salmon already packed? Is it good for you? I'm wondering if she's talking about like the canned pink salmon.
Yeah, usually if you mean the canned pink salmon or the canned tuna, usually my big recommendation for canned products is make sure that it's packed in water.
Mm,
So try to avoid getting the ones that are packed in oil or packed in extra items just because you don't really need that. And you could add things yourself to add flavor to your fish, and that way you have that control.
yeah, because I've seen like it's oils, different things that they put in them.
Mhm.
Okay, and then there's no difference as far as like if it's a pink salmon or something else. As far as like, I think that's the only. I think she was talking about the can because she said yes. She
Yeah,
was
and I eat canned salmon on a pretty regular basis. It's one of my easy ways to make like salmon salad. If I'm not in a tuna salad kind of mood, that could be
okay.
pretty good. So I do buy
So
canned salmon
so
myself.
making for sure of the water that is in
Mhm.
water, and I would think if you like have hypertension or something extra, make sure watch the sodium content of it.
Yes. So usually if it's packed in just water and it's just salmon and water, it shouldn't have added sodium.
Okay.
But if you are someone who has hypertension or high blood pressure, or just in general, you're trying to watch your sodium, which all of us should do to avoid having high blood
Right.
pressure, be mindful more so when you're buying canned goods that you're trying to do no salt added canned goods as much as you can, or you're looking for that low sodium label.
Mhm.
And it can be helpful if you're buying canned goods and say they don't have the no salt added and you get low sodium, you can rinse that with cold water to get some more of that salt off so that you're reducing that sodium. Because I know canned goods can be really helpful if
Mhm.
you don't have a big fridge or if you just don't know if you'll eat it right away to kind
Right.
of help you keep your, food from spoiling.
Yeah, I was always told fresh if you could, frozen would be next, low sodium would be next, and then rinse it. And then I even heard about soaking it for 10 minutes, additional
Yeah.
to the do you
I
tell your
don't know you really need to soak it. I haven't really
okay.
had my patients do that so often, but I will tell them like go ahead and put it in a colander and like run it under the cold water. Don't just like rinse it once, but like move it around so you're getting that sodium off.
Okay.
But definitely when it comes to frozen items as well, keep in mind when you're buying, frozen fruits and vegetables, you want to look for the ones where it's only the fruit and the vegetable. No sauce added, no cheese added. Because
Mm.
that's where you
Yeah.
kind of get into trouble with your sodium is when you buy the things that have a lot of like cheese sauce or garlic sauce added themselves. They want it to taste really good. So they're going to add a lot of salt to that you may not want to be having.
Some of them now I've seen where they have the packet inside, so you could kind of
Do it
spread it out if
separate.
you want it. I mean, I don't buy that. I've seen it a couple of times, but yeah, I was like, oh, that's neat for people who want
You
to
want
watch,
to decide.
want a little bit of flavor, I guess. So uh what was I think that was it. I think, but I had a question and it just flew out my brain just quick. But it was a pretty good question too, and I hate that. But I'll
It's
have to
okay. It happens to me all the time.
swear. I'm like, what in the world? What do I need to eat for my memory? So it's like, but yeah, this has been informative. That's what it was. I'm glad I said that. Protein shakes. Um,
Mhm.
the powder though, are those because a lot of times cancer patients they go through chemo and like you stated, you have a milkshake or something, or even afterwards, they're trying to build more protein and they're trying to do more plant-based. So it's like, oh, maybe I'll have one protein shake today, but one where I
Yeah.
use my soy milk and do like one scoop. Are those things okay? And if so, like how often or what should people be concerned about with that? Because I know it's obviously
Definitely.
a process.
I encourage my patients to do that all the time. I think the big thing to be mindful of, particularly when you do the protein powders,
Mhm.
is how much they've added to it when it comes to like nutrients and additives. So not so much if they've added some vitamins and minerals, but check with your cancer team because there are certain chemotherapies that you don't really want high antioxidants in.
Okay.
But when it comes to protein, sometimes you'll see like they've added all these random things, like we've added creatinine and all these other extra
Yeah.
things. So, or sorry, creatine. You want to be
Yeah.
careful that you're not buying something that has additives that you don't want. Because generally during cancer treatment, we're aiming for the protein. The protein's what we want. So I'll usually tell people if you don't like the taste of some of the protein powders, some people don't like the vanilla or chocolate flavors added, you can buy unflavored whey protein, can be a really good option. That way
Okay.
there's nothing in there but the whey protein, and you can kind of put it in smoothies or milkshakes and it'll taste like what you're putting it in.
Mm,
But
okay.
definitely those can be a very important part of cancer care and making sure you're getting enough protein if you're struggling.
Nice. I think that's it. I was asking anyone if they had any other questions, but I don't see any. Yeah, I thank you so much. I know I've added a lot more questions, but it was good. I thank you so much for the information that you shared tonight. I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. Look, now my friend came on. But but yeah, so as we get ready to wrap up, I would like to know, you didn't have it on the reel, but what is maybe one of your favorite songs that you like and why do you like it? And it could be something fun.
So off the top of my head, thinking of something kind of funny that probably no one else will find entertaining but me, is one of my favorite songs is Once Upon a Dream.
Oh,
And the only reason for that is me and my husband, from the start of us dating, when we are waiting for something to cook, we will sometimes dance in our kitchen. And that is one of the funny songs I will sing to him when I'm dancing with him in the kitchen, which is a little ridiculous, but it's the first thing that comes to my head.
yeah,
And that was actually our first dance song at our wedding because it was meaningful to us in our kitchen dancing.
absolutely. Yeah, that's fun. I like that. And before we end, I would like to know, is there anything, far as a word, one word that that
Mhm.
maybe inspires you or that can encourage someone else? They may have a wound, an open wound, mental, physical wound,
Yeah,
or scar, and they're just trying to deal with it. What would you share
absolutely.
with them, far as a word, and why would you choose that word?
So when I think of my cancer patients and my cancer survivors, the big word I think of is fortitude. So
Mm,
that means, for those of you who don't know, it means to show courage in the face of pain or
mm,
adversity.
wow.
And I think those of you who are going through cancer treatment now or have gone through cancer treatment have definitely showed a lot of fortitude. And it makes me think of you guys fondly.
Thank you so much. And I just want to leave with you that when I have spoken with you, now, hopefully you'll come back again to give us updates. But you are very, very calming. And I think that's a good quality to have, especially working with oncology, cancer patients as a whole. I think that's something that sometimes is missing. Not necessarily in the medical field, just across the board. And sometimes, we can be a lot to deal with because we're dealing with a lot and a lot's coming at us. But just to have someone who's very calming and who's calm to talk to someone and not be judgmental, but actually try to help them from a holistic standpoint, like you stated, that's good. Because when you mentioned the word holistic to me, I automatically thought, okay, she doesn't just care about my body, she cares about my mind, she cares about my soul, she cares about my spirit, she cares about me as a whole being, not just my food intake. And
Absolutely.
that means a lot. And I just encourage you to continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate it.
All right.
This was so much fun.
Thank you. Well, this wraps up another episode of Our Scars Speak. And remember that your mental and your physical scars speak a story that should be told, but we can't make you tell it. So if you want to hold it and never share it, that's fine. But just know that your mental and physical scars can help heal the wounds of another if you're willing to share. So with that being said, we love you and we'll see you again next week. Bye.